I constantly get asked, why do I care so much and why do I try so hard to get a fair deal for our ecology and our environment, and expose the government so much because of what's been done, and more importantly what has not been done. You know, when you see roadside infestations like I've shown you, just endlessly forever, with wild tobacco and lantana and all those types of things, it's one particular situation when you're trying to explain to people that this isn't a victimless crime. This material ends up somewhere else in somebody's watercourse. Everybody basically is downstream of the government in some manner or another, and it just does not end. On the other side of the road here is reclaimed state forest into national parks controls. And you know, this material I've been filming for the last 12 months, and it's expanded by at least 60%. At least 60%, as it drops into the watercourses and continues its way across private lands further downstream. But when you actually look at the level of those infestations there, and they all are illegal to be there, if this was private land, they'd be issued with a breach notice and they'd be taken to court. So they'd be given the option of the council coming onto the property and cleaning up the materials, which the councils on average are about 20 times more expensive than what we are. And actually about 1,000% when you consider that there's only 5 councils in Australia that are actually in the black, that are actually functionally viable. The rest of the councils are all busted ass broke. And that was one of the major reasons why I believe the Premier secretly changed the classification on Lantana to be, as Moreton Bay Regional Council and Brisbane City Council equated it, as low risk, and they didn't ever need to do any more work on Lantana anymore, which actually 2 years later we find is actually completely false and completely illegal for these materials to be growing anywhere. So basically here we are, national parks lands, and that's a 60% increase in 1 year on those lands. And basically I worked it out, when I was working it out, it was 50,000 acres of land there. So if you work that out, that's about say $5,000 an acre to clean this stuff up and process it, just on rough terms, just to work it out. You know, you start to get a picture of why the Premier, when they work like this, actually moved to say, well, you know what, we give up. And that's what actually happened. When my investigations went ahead with the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, the low risk doesn't actually equate to the material being low risk. What it equated to was, on their risk assessment based weeds program that they were trying to implement, that's the state government through with the councils, what the low risk related to was that there's very little chance that they can successfully do anything with the materials, because they have no ability in the biosecurity side of things. And moreover than that, they actually figured that they could give up on it and nobody would be the wiser. The trouble is, it makes it somebody else's problem further down the path, and then some other government or some other children end up wearing hundreds of billions of dollars a year in damages caused by these materials. And hopefully by then this Premier and the Prime Ministers will be that far gone from it that nobody would ever have figured it out. But unfortunately I didn't ever stop digging and uncovering and asking questions, and then finding that that's correct. Under the Biosecurity Act, these materials can't be here. They can't be allowed to expand on private land. They can't be allowed to expand on government lands. The National Parks says that if they get some money given to them, they'll let me know if they get some money. That was 12, 18 months ago. I guess they haven't got any money, hey? But there were deals done with the courts and with the councils and with the state government that said that the courts would actually, the owner of the property would be handed a breach notice. They would be given a time frame to comply. If they didn't comply, then the councils would go in and the councils would do the works at whatever they wanted to charge for it. And then to make sure that the councils recovered their money within the court system, the court would put that put those costs onto the person's rates. So no matter how it went, when the property was sold, the councils would get their money. Now, nobody's said anything about how these breach notices work in relations to councils, how they work in relations to National Parks and Wildlife, main roads, or any of the other government departments. Even though it's actually clearly written that none of these people, places, organisations have a get out of jail clause. There's nowhere within that system that it said that they were exempt from the law. In fact, it states everywhere you can find that the opposite is true. They are obliged and compelled to comply with the law and comply with not releasing this material into the environment. Now the question to the Premier is, how come those classifications were changed? And also, this is an ecological disaster. And this is 50,000 acres of this stuff, to the point that the Rural Fire Brigade said on the next road down, they wouldn't attend a fire if a fire happened on that road, because it was too lethally dangerous with the amount of lantana that grows on both sides of the single lane dirt road. And yet, you know, that's what we face as a nation. We face a government who does not comply with the law, a Prime Minister who does not stand up for the people, although he swore an oath to the people. This house here was resumed by the National Parks and these mobs, and every time you go past it, that lantana up there at the roof line of that house was down around underneath the patio of that house. And yet in 1 year, that's what you're looking at. It's well over a 60% increase in the materials on those lands. That's what our national parks looks after our heritage and environment like. How come nobody's jumping up and down and complaining about that? All the animals, all the native animals are long since gone. There's only a few cattle here pushing their way around these materials. And in a lot of places where these materials have closed over pretty much completely, those animals aren't even going in there anymore. And then within 3 years, those animals are supposed to be removed from these environments. And when they are removed, at that point, everything changes, because they are the only resistance and the only money coming into national parks at that point. So this is where we're at, showing you what sort of reasons why I fight so hard. I guess it's a little bit of a situation of saying, well, it's just wrong. It says, the law says it can't happen like this. I can't help but keep asking, well, why are we allowing them to do it? This isn't a victimless crime. The properties down that way along this road all have all of this trash, all of these seeds from these materials out of the state forest and out of the national parks, all being dumped through their lands, you know. And the Somerset Council says, oh, well, we've got no money for it, so, you know, if you actually push the point, then we'll go after the residents and we'll make the residents' lives a nightmare. That's what we face. When you actually bring them to answer the questions, they reckon they're going to turn on the public. And yet this is the councils. All this stuff along here is the council stuff on the council's edge of the road. They're responsible for this. And yet they say, no, actually they say they don't have to worry about it where it's on a dirt road, but I don't think that's dirt. Do you think that's dirt? Is that a dirt road? I must be missing something. You know, it's obscene what councils have gotten away with for such a long time, and nobody has held them accountable. And Lord Mayor Quirk's doing a big runner now and going, I'm out of here. But you know, all of the councils in biosecurity are admitting that I'm right, that that is how the biosecurity law is written. And it's a major problem because they knew it was illegal for these materials to grow where they were. But with deals done with the state government, with the Premier, to not ask for money, it placed all of us with our lands at the end of these things in harm's way. Now, what happens is all of these materials, whether it's here or whether it's further in towards Dayborough, all of these materials continue to mature and flush seeds and endlessly propagate it at 3,600 plants per plant. And it just continues to go and continues to go and end up on private lands all over the place. In most cases, most people don't realise how far the seeds have travelled from the embankments and hillsides that they were on all the way through the watercourses to their lands. Now, the state government told the councils, look at the wild tobacco growing here so healthily, all of it. They told the councils that they weren't going to give them any more money, and the councils had to use us to be able to get funding, like to survive, to get money and funding. So they had to get it from us. Hence all of the development permits and everything else that we've got to pay for and do, just to do anything. If you want to go to the bathroom on your land, you need a development permit. So we're only a food source for the government, but the government doesn't live up to its responsibilities of its ecological environment. You look at this stuff here, and it's just obscene what is happening to a watercourse in a national park. Just absolutely obscene. So what ended up happening is that Moreton Bay Regional Council now are making noises to people who own horses, who live on floodplains, to tell them to be warned in the next couple of years. They intend to tell you that you can't have horses on floodplains because the manure washing downstream is not healthy, apparently, according to them. So a reason that you bought a property is likely to change without any consultation to you, because they can. Also, if you don't keep your vegetation under control, right, once the vegetation gets to a certain size, the government takes over control of your lands by basically saying it's now not regrowth, it actually is, you know, important materials, and you can't reclaim the land back to grass. So a lot of horse owners better start to get their head around that the government and the councils aren't about providing services to them or doing the right thing. They are about collecting revenue and about taking control of your lands. Now, the reason why that started with taking control of your lands is because, well, you see that? Did you get that picture? So how much longer do you think it's going to be before all of these lands, all of this state forest, all of these national parks are completely uninhabitable by animals? Well, it's pretty much now. And the Premier has been told that, obviously, many, many times by the powers that be in biosecurity and endangered species. So the only way that the government can move forward there is to actually take control of lands that come with their own greenskeepers. Yeah, us, our lands. And in that way they can demand that we clean up our lands. Now, you're keeping up with this because you look at what the facts of this has been all along. This is facts. This is their story. If you have this material growing on your land, it's a breach notice. Okay, you have any of this material growing on your land, it's a breach notice. And subject to a breach notice, the council will come up and they will clean this land off of yours and bill you for it. The courts will then uphold that billing of that works on your land at council rates, which is, you know, like I said, around 100 times what it would cost for me to do your land. So at that point, they put those prices on your rates, so they're guaranteed of getting paid. And yet, you look at how many hundreds of kilometres of this material I've shown you, and not all of it has been on National Parks lands. Lands controlled by people who, it says on the fence, that they are responsible for the heritage and environment. They are responsible for our heritage and our environment. And that is what they have growing on our, remember, they're our national parks, not theirs. They don't own them. They're supposed to be the caretakers. They actually take money off us to administer those land rights, to look after them. Why the hell would we be giving any land to these people? You have a look at it. That's 60% increase in those materials in 12 months, and nobody has said a word. And trust me, I've sent plenty of this documentation, and this one will go to the Premier as well, and the Prime Minister. It's illegal for this material to be on the side of the road, but it is proof that they don't have a clue about Lantana and how the water falling on the roads, shaped on the roads, into the drainage ditches and feeding these materials all year round. 10 times these materials have reseeded this year in the last 12 months. So that's 6,000 new plants for every single plant. And it's only illegal if it's on your land. It's only illegal through the court system if it's on your land. These experts can take you to court, come onto your land by force, clean up those materials on your land and hand you an enormous bill. It's funny when people get handed those documents. You know, someday somebody from Lantana Removal Queensland's liable to find out that they're lying, they're deceitful. The Premier is operating illegally in calling it low risk because they lost control of it. But see, when they changed all that and they came up with the low risk, they completely stopped any control measures. So when you look at all of these things, every single council I approached in that 2017-18 period all said there were zero operations in Lantana because of the Premier coming up with that low risk statement. And the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energies said that there would be no works done on any Lantana except for new Lantana. Now that was defined, because I went, how does that work? And they said, well, the new Lantana is defined by the distance a bird can fly from the original source of the Lantana. Now that would imply that we're all idiots, and it would imply that the government knows which Lantana is old Lantana. They would know which Lantana is existing Lantana, and they would know what Lantana is new Lantana. You know, that's the most stupid thing I had ever heard to that point. But after that, I proved, in 158 years of Lantana being in Australia, I proved Lantana seeds float. Well, that changes everything about what we know about Lantana and the dangers that Lantana poses, because once Lantana is waterborne, the seeds are waterborne, the same as the wild tobacco and the spiky apple, then the spread of having these materials sitting on the sides of roads, where you get a large flush of water off the road surface pushing down through these areas and into the creek and flushing those seeds down into that creek, that's a massive change in the way that Lantana moves. And hence why it's such an important thing that when this material gets up to the ridge lines, It's a catastrophe because the speed that it gets washed back down the hillsides is massive. The propagation rates and speed rates and zones of influence are just massive, and they all come through your properties. So within 12 months you can have 3 acres, 10 acres gone, 20 acres. I've seen nightmares that you would not believe, and all from land infestations that the people couldn't even see. So that's why our services of investigating properties prior to purchase are so important, because there are many places where we go to where we get asked to look at properties, and I have to say to people, you know, even if they gave you this land, you do not want it, because what's up there in the hillside, what is up there in the mountainside, you are never gonna ever keep up with what comes out of there in the next 10 years, ever. Now that's not what people want to hear, but when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars per year of lantana that wasn't your lantana being washed onto your property, normally off council and government lands. You know, the worst neighbour that you can have in Australia is government and councils. It's the worst neighbour you can have. They've proven that they have no ecological responsibility. Main roads are the worst to try and talk to. National parks just say, well, when we get some money, we'll talk to you then. They never have any intention. They're never going to get money. And when the cattle come out of the national parks, all of the money they currently have is going to dry up. So what do you think is going to happen in 3 years' time when the cattle come out of the forestry? You think it's going to get better? Only people who don't like cattle say that it's going to get better when cattle come out of that forestry. I can tell you now, from what I've filmed and what I've shown people, the amount of material that is, the cattle are the only things holding back those materials, right? So when the cattle come out of there, all bets are off. Within months, it'll be a complete close over and nothing will get through it. Koalas get killed by lantana all the time from the wild dogs as soon as they come down to the ground to try and go somewhere else. And then once lantana gets to a certain thickness and certain density, all the Australian natives just give up on it. If you fly drones over, I fly drones all day, every day, all the time, and you fly it over grasslands and lands like this, and you look down, there are no tracks anymore where these animals cut a path through it. The only animal that's still going through any of these lands is cattle. That's the only ones. Nothing else bothers. Everything else has just moved out. So I suspect if ever we actually did a independent, proper count on the animals still left in the Australian bushland, it would be horrendous. Our government is very close to making every single animal and living thing into an endangered species. So only 2% of our nation is actually protected, and that's the actual endangered species areas. 98% of it isn't protected, and that's your lands, and you're responsible for everything that is on your lands. So if you buy land and it's got lantana on it, that's too bad. That's your, why did you buy land with lantana on it? You know? And again, my services, when you go and look at some terrains and everything's below you and you really don't have a big weeds infestation thing above you, it's not so bad. But when you have complete mountainsides of lantana above you, right, everything's a bad day. Every single ravine and waterway and cutaway is all full of lantana. There's only one place it can get to, you, downstream. So if it didn't have lantana on it before, it's going to have it in the future. That's why I keep saying to people, you know, no matter what you do, you don't want to buy land with lantana on it unless you have the ability and means, the capital funding, to deal with those materials. And you want to know if it's a $50,000 problem or if it's a $200,000 problem, or I've seen $500,000 problems. So you need to be well and truly aware when you buy it. And it was interesting because only a week or two, say 3 weeks ago when I wasn't sick, some solicitor-based guy got on there and said, oh, you'll go to jail, you know, the ACCC will be all over you, you know, you're telling people that if they buy land with Lantana on it, they'll be responsible for it and they'll be in a world of hurt and blah, blah, blah. Obviously somebody to do with the government and the Lantana side of it, because they didn't like me making the comments that if you purchase land with Lantana on, you got major problems. Now, I have a general duty of care obligation to the public to explain to them what the cost of Lantana on their land is. Now, the moment you purchase land, you purchased it with whatever was on it. If it had drugs growing on that land, the drugs would be your problem. That's a fact. You try telling the policeman that, yeah, I bought the land, but the hooch was growing there. It's not really my problem. Well, good luck with that. I'd like to see how you make out in court. Because this person wanted to say to me, if you find somebody who'll back that up, well, I have an absolute duty care obligation where people are buying lands and the lands have a $50,000, $100,000, a $300,000 problem, then people need to know that before they purchase those lands. We should have real estates made accountable to disclose to people the level of the infestations and the approximate costs, or we should have to do assessments for people so that they know that it's a $100,000 problem or it's a $500,000 problem, and they pay accordingly. But we see that many people with stars in their eyes that purchased land and paid full retail price, and it's got a $300,000 problem in Lantana on it because of the terrains that it's in and the size of the scale of the problem. People deserve to know that. Now, what people also deserve to know, and this is something I'm very firm about with the Premier and the biosecurity and the state government, people should be absolutely told if the councils won't clean up the Lantana. So if you've got Lantana growing all along a roadside anywhere in Queensland or New South Wales, you don't need to ask the council whether or not the council are going to support you when you purchase land and suddenly the council says you need to clean up. Because they're not going to support you, okay? They'll force you to clean your stuff up, but how is this stuff on the side of the road outside your property? This is happening all over Australia. So you deserve to know before you purchase land if the Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council, or any council from the Daintree to the Victorian border is going to support your cleaning up. So if you clean your land up, I believe you have the right to ring up the council and say, I want that gone off my footpath immediately. I totally believe that you should have that right. That's the minimum right. And the Premier should have to explain how that material has been allowed to be there. 10 times it's seeded this year, this 12-month period. That's obscene. That's 6,000 new plants for every single plant. And she changed the classification to low risk because she says they lost control of it. But they removed all management strategies and funding altogether. All of it. The whole lot went. The council's told all of the residents not to bother. We're not doing anything with Lantana anymore. It's growing at 6,000 plants per plant. What was going to happen in the future? It's obscene. It's nuts. It's a 60% increase across the road there, where it's illegal for it to be allowed to increase anywhere. And that is national parks. They are supposed to be the professionals in land care. Their charter is that they are responsible for our heritage and our environment. And we give them more land because the greenies say, isn't that a fantastic thing? We just got another farm resumed and given to national parks so they can do that. This farm had a 60% increase in 12 months. So what's going to happen in the next 12 months? What will happen in the next 12 months with that material? And all of the people downstream that cop that. And that's not the worst infestations all the way through. But that's what we're fighting, and that's what I'm trying to get to people. That's why I care so much. Yes, it's a little bit naive to say, well, I just can't accept that if it's illegal, it's okay for them to just turn a blind eye to it and allow it to happen because they want to. That's not okay. We can't continue to pretend that these people are acting in the interests of the people and of the environment. They're not by a long shot. But the consequences of people's lands being sold for half and a third of the price of what they paid for them is the real consequence of these policies by the premiers of New South Wales and Queensland. So, you know, you go and you buy a property, you buy an acreage, and you put up 50% of the money and the bank puts up 50% of the money. You pay full retail for the price of the land because the real estates aren't obliged to tell you how much this is going to cost or that you need to worry about this. So 12 months' time, it's worth 50% of what you paid for it. Who loses their 50%? You or the bank? You need to think about those things properly because they're not a joke. And the more that these materials are hitting fertile lands, good grazing lands, the faster they are spreading and the stronger they are getting. And as they get to be much stronger clumps of these materials, the actual propagation rates increase even further. And the damage to the soils that result from it increase even further. We need to educate people. The lying sacks of garbage that run around and say Lantana improves soil health are absolute lying sacks of garbage. The same mob that say Lantana means that this soil is prime, beautiful soil. So buying this soil, once you clean that Lantana off it, then you will have an amazing farm with beautiful, rich soils. It's all lies. And it's all from people who have a reason to tell you a lie because they have land they can't repair. So at some stage with the government, we have a choice with the federal and the state government, which the state government says they are not in favour of a national capital works program on a taxpayer-based system. The trouble is they've created 14 million hectares at the beginning of 2019. By the end of 2019, it'll be 20 million hectares and $250 billion problem. Now, when we look at those things, the real issue is how else is it going to be dealt with? The banks are not going to front more money to somebody who paid full retail price for land, okay? They're not. Then there's no way in the wide world the banks are going to lend money for weed management on land where people paid double the price that they should have paid. So the government then ends up in a position, do they end up offering loans to families to actually to do that work so that the property can be returned to value and then possibly the people can sell it out and get the hell out of the valley? Because there's a lot of valleys in local areas around where we live in southeast Queensland that people cannot get out of those areas because councils have created this nightmare and the state government created the nightmare with the councils. So here we are. It's okay for the Premier Palaszczuk to say, well, we're not in favour of a taxpayer-funded system of cleaning up. Well, they created all this mess. Nobody else is going to clean it up. It only has one way going. None of this stuff stops growing. You can't poison it except for 2 months of the year. And all of the biological controls have backfired incredibly. There will never be a biological control for these materials. So we are stuck in a situation where it's growing that strong, that fast, and now it's getting onto the ridge lines from the roadsides and the waterways. The increases in these materials in this 10-year period is going to rewrite what we know about Lantana
plus the added thing that it's into farmland that it would never gotten into before, because the farmers are gone broke because of the government policies on dairy and everything else. You know, so there is no future there, and the blocks being split up into small blocks for lifestyle farms with no knowledge of how to look after it, or that these things are even a problem. Half of these people live in Sydney or somewhere else. They come back 2 years later and half of their property's gone. Half of their 200-acre property is gone. And they're facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in works to deal with those issues, or more, depending on the terrain that those areas are in. And that's a bigger reason, if you're thinking of buying an investment property, you damn well want to know what threats are around you, because, you know, if you have much higher land around you and those people aren't cleaning up, you're going to have that problem very quickly. And in the Sunshine Coast, we're watching on Google Earth these materials just flowing over hillsides like a great, enormous cresting wave, and then funneling down the ravines and networks of the creeks and tributaries as they come off those ridge lines. It's absolutely incredible to actually physically see from above. And it's not happy days, because a lot of that country is really fertile country. A lot of it is semi-steep country, so it's very expensive to deal with. And it's getting into a lot of seriously steep country, which is even more aggressive to deal with cost-wise. So it's time the truth got told to people. No, Lantana does not signify that the soil is beautiful. That's the greatest lie under the sun. No one can tell you what's under that lantana until the lantana is removed. No, it does not improve soil health. And no, it does not encourage animals or living organisms into the area. Lantana is the only material you clean off to bare earth, and there is nothing. No birds show up. No birds come and fossick through it. You can clean up other materials, grasses, all sorts of different things, trees, and you'll find magpies and kookaburras and all sorts of other birds will show up and pick through what's at ground level. Lantana, zero. Always has been. Last 40 years, zero bird activity to fossick the ground. That tells you there is nothing healthy happening subsoil where lantana is. That's a fact. But people need to know these things, because the people telling you that there are benefits or this is a good thing are telling you that because they need to sell that property. They don't care you're going to get stuck with it. They don't care you're the last mug in the line that's going to get burned and you're going to lose all your money. As long as they get out of this terrible situation, that's all they care about. And you need to understand that. And your Premier changing the classification to low risk is living proof that people will do some absolutely horrid things to cover up such economical, ecological tragedies and catastrophes as what this material is. This next 12 months, this next lot of years, you watch the fires that go through our national parks. They are going to be obscene, and they're going to always increase and get worse because of the fuel loads that are being created by these materials running rampant through every national park. There is not one national park that is not run rampant with this stuff. Even Fraser Island is rampant with lantana. And that is a World Heritage listed national parks. If you worked out how much money goes into Fraser Island, as opposed to any of these other busted ass broke national parks like Diagula, and all the way from Ipswich all the way north, you know, these guys don't get any money to really do much with anything. So it's something that we better be very serious about in the future, and we better start forcing these government departments to care about these things. You know, 60% increase in this, and we have to go and ask the national parks how they justify that, because it's completely illegal. How does the Premier turn a blind eye to this? The court system says that saying you got no money is not an acceptable outcome. It's not okay. We better stop allowing national parks to be given more land to destroy. That's in New South Wales and that's in Queensland. We have to stop them from destroying more of our nation, because once they destroy it like this, we have no other option but to give up on it. There's nowhere that nobody's going to put the money up to fix this. The government is never going to, and this is visible. This is visible from the road for 30 kilometres up to a kilometre inland is completely visible. At least it's probably 2 kilometres you can see, counting both sides of the road, and it's completely obscene, and 60% increase in the last 12 months, and completely illegal. And where do we go from here? Anyway, I'm Garry from Lantana Removal Queensland.com.au, 0449 986 880. Please support us in using our services. We mulch materials and clean up all sorts of terrain, 20 to 30 degree terrains where we live at. We're the only ones that meet the legal government requirements in those terrains, and we get permanent results with Lantana, have done for the last 40 years. That's how my basis and systems work. It's not cheap to eradicate Lantana, but it's much cheaper to eradicate it properly on the first and second pass than to, for every 2 years, just keep re-hedging and re-trimming the material and never ever succeed. It also helps to know what areas you need to pay even more attention to. But the same thing applies. You're better off doing the whole block in one hit. This government rubbish of saying just do a little piece as you please and as you can is all rubbish. If you're only dealing with an acre of Lantana, fine, you can get away with that. If you're dealing with 10 acres or 20 acres or 100 acres, it's all garbage. You need to clean the whole lot, have it completely clean, and then just deal with rehabilitation. Otherwise, you will spend at least double what it would have cost you to have just cleaned the whole lot. And it might not be a happy figure to say, well, that's what it's going to cost you to clean it up in the one hit. But at the end of the day, it's going to cost you double, spending 10 and 20 years of your life to do it. And then half of the people go broke in between that cycle, can't finish it off. 30 years goes past and the property's worth half of what it was worth. So they walk away with basically nothing. The bank still gets their 50%, and you walk away with nothing for the experience of 30 years of your life. I see so many tragedies with people buying land that they should never have bought with Lantana on it. And, you know, you look down the road, there's your excuse. You got road frontage like that covered in Lantana. You don't want to be buying in that council area. You don't want to buy in that part of Australia, I'm telling you now, because your premiers won't support you or even operate legally. Anyway, once again, I'm Garry. I'll catch you on the next one. See you later. Bye-bye.